Finally, a U.S. presidential election result that Donald Trump can live with. The news outlets that accidentally helped him win, and what Trump may have in store for them. Israel's game plan for northern Gaza exposed, the journalists, Israeli ones, who had something to do with that. And toxic masculinity is traveling the World Wide Web. We examine the impact it's having in Kenya. Donald Trump's shock victory in the U.S. election this past week was an indictment, another one, of the Democratic Party establishment, its less than democratic ways, and the news outlets in its corner. For years, both the party and its media cohorts tried to conceal the cognitive decline of their original candidate, Joe Biden, even though it was clear to see. When that failed, rather than trust their voters and hold an open convention, a democratic process, they effectively anointed Biden's unpopular deputy, Kamala Harris, as his successor. In a $1 billion campaign, they went for theater, like celebrity endorsements and fear-mongering about Trump, narratives that were undermined in a constantly changing media space. Elon Musk, now a social media mogul, had his thumbs on Trump's side of the scales. A booming network of online influencers, including podcasters, were doing the same. In the aftermath, those liberal-leaning outlets that are now asking how Americans could possibly elect Donald Trump again would be better off asking questions about themselves. In the wake of a seminal political event, such as Donald Trump's election victory, there is a tendency, a need that news outlets and pundits have to boil the outcome down to a single determining factor.
It was the Latino man. It was the Latino man who decided that they were going to vote for Donald Trump.
News audiences have become addicted to the hot take.
I can't help but wonder if the American people have given up on democracy.
A simple answer to a complicated question that deserves better than a reductive explanation.
Maybe she's just a bad messenger, selling a bad product.
The mistaking of a contributing factor for something that is causal.
Harris's loss was so large that I don't know that you can attribute one particular constituency or one particular set of things to the outcome.
The two campaigns had two different messages, and the American people decided to go in a certain direction.
But none of that would have worked at all had the Democrats not done such an extraordinarily good job at failing.
Starting with who they put at the top of the ticket. As news channels that lean the Democrats' way, like CNN and MSNBC, tried to piece together what cost the party this election, they could have looked at themselves. Those networks spent most of Joe Biden's presidency turning a blind eye to the unmistakable signs of Biden's cognitive decline.
You know, I did a 30, 40-minute sit-down interview with President Biden about grief. In that format, he was incredibly heartfelt and, intense and got across exactly what he wanted to say.
And when they weren't ignoring the obvious, they tried to deny it.
He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been.
Then, when Biden's disastrous debate effectively crashed his campaign, those same news channels went along with the party's conclusion that the only candidate who could replace Biden was his vice president, that there was no time to hold an open convention, despite Kamala Harris's role in an administration that the polls said was unpopular with voters.
Kamala Harris was essentially just handed the nomination without any real process, when it would have been much healthier to have had Democratic voters pick their nominee. That person also would have been better prepared to handle the onslaught that would follow that nomination, instead of acting the way Kamala Harris did, terrified of speaking or addressing any real issues in a meaningful sense. And that ended up being her undoing.
The time to discuss a primary to replace Joe Biden was not the middle of 2024. This is a conversation that should have been had years ago. And the fact that most people in political media didn't really take his age seriously as a concern until this debate is an indictment of the extent to which they can really understand what's going on in the electorate. The fact that they didn't have one is going to have to lead people to do a little bit of soul searching in the years ahead.
The election result has also been characterized as the official death knell for the U.S. mainstream media. If that sounds familiar, it's because we heard the same thing in 2016 when Donald Trump was first elected. Back then, social media was changing the news landscape. This time, it was podcasts like Joe Rogan's and a host of others, where Trump could reach tens of millions of voters, most of them male.
Well, the wildest one is this idea of giving free sex change to illegal immigrants.
That's right. In detention.
That is the wildest thing. Like, you just walked here from Guatemala, you need to become a girl.
That landed Trump huge audiences without having to endure tough questions from seasoned journalists on issues like female reproductive rights, abortion. Trump's targeting of male votes was aided and abetted by Elon Musk, who donated almost $200 million to the Trump campaign and made constant contributions to the debate through the platform he owns and controls. According to a study by a non-profit group, the Center for Countering Digital Hate, during this election year, false or misleading tweets by Musk have amassed 2 billion views.
Elon Musk has effectively turned the platform Twitter, now X, into a massive pro-Trump campaign. He seems to have rigged the entire algorithm to make sure that you're seeing the content that he's personally putting out. And it's frankly deranged, suggesting that a Kamala Harris victory is a victory for fascism and the sheer necessity of having a Trump victory in order to preserve whatever freedom is left in America.
Vice President Harris had a lot of celebrities show up with her, but those celebrities are people that are just that. They're not influencers. Elon Musk and X had an enormous impact on the campaign and the election results. No question that they were instrumental in helping the president win the election, and I would say specifically in the blue wall states, where I think he concentrated most of his efforts.
How much did Elon Musk's role with X play? I think it's too early to tell, too soon to tell without more granular data analysis. But I'm nervous to make a claim that he had a very clever get out the vote campaign. He certainly did not. And to be sure, we did not see many millions more people come out for Trump. There was not a shift in mass numbers of voters away from the Democrats towards Donald Trump. What we did see is a failed Democratic campaign that lost, in the last few years, millions of voters.
Voters who were driven primarily by economic issues. According to economists, the U.S. is not in a recession, but polls indicate that 6 out of 10 voters thought it was. They got there with the help of the Trump campaign. Then there was the block of voters Kamala Harris lost over the Biden administration's backing, funding, and arming of Israel's horrific war on Palestinians in Gaza. Harris had a choice. She could have distanced herself from a genocide, promised to bring Israel under control. She did not, and it cost her.
President Biden and Kamala Harris have pursued an absolutely atrocious policy on Palestine and Israel, in particular with Gaza, some of the most horrific atrocities that you can't hide from the public, even though American mainstream media is to some extent complicit in covering up what is actually unfolding. Everybody can see the images on their phones. And there is significant anger, not just from the Arab and Muslim communities, but also from young people, from progressive constituencies, from students, from people of color.
This is an immoral war, it's a genocidal war. And even Americans who are not themselves pro-Palestine activists saw our inability to rein Israel in as a kind of ineffectuality on the part of this administration, like we were not in control of this important foreign policy situation.
We did see some really dastardly tactics deployed by the Trump campaign. For example, sending Arab Americans in Michigan, messaging, doubling down on the Harris campaign's support for Israel and its genocidal war on Gaza. But at the same time, the Trump campaign was sending messages to Jewish voters in Pennsylvania, for example, suggesting that Harris was the anti-Israel candidate and was a pro-Palestine candidate, which couldn't be more untrue. But at the end of the day, it is the Harris campaign and it is the Democratic establishment that could not stand up to that kind of propaganda effort because they didn't have a leg to stand on.
Americans are about to see what a second Trump presidency will look like, how it differs from the first. Like 2016, he keeps targeting the mainstream media, but has taken the fake news narrative much further.
And you know, the enemy camp is certain networks.
Trump has filed a huge lawsuit against one network, CBS News, over the way it edited an interview with Kamala Harris, and has threatened to revoke the broadcast license of another, ABC News, for its handling of the presidential debate. Trump's first stint in the White House put U.S. journalism to the test. This one will too, in a different way.
The president has filed a $10 billion lawsuit against CBS, and those are the things that the courts will analyze whether there is merit. We have a free press that's guaranteed by our Constitution, but at some point, the American people need to almost be told, you know, okay, I am free to say what I want in print, but I'm not objective. Just say you're a partisan.
I don't think that they're going to be spooked by the threats Trump is making. I hope it'll be legally difficult for him to make good on those threats. But for all the criticisms I have as a left-wing journalist of mainstream American political journalism, I think that they're going to try to continue doing their jobs in the way that they think they should. I don't think that you're going to see most journalists and most outlets cower in fear of this administration.
With the eyes of the world focused on the U.S. election, the Israeli military's campaign of ethnic cleansing in northern Gaza is continuing. And journalists reporting from there have revealed details about Israel's intentions. Tariq Nafi is here with more.
For a month now, the northern Gaza Strip has been under total siege by the Israeli military, which is using starvation, bombardment, and destruction to force people from their homes. This week, a group of Israeli correspondents accompanied soldiers on the ground to show Israelis what that looks like.
ביקשו מהאזרחים כאן להתפנות והחלו בפעולה כאן לתיאור השטח מהמחבלים. כשמסתכלים ימינה ושמאלה רואים שאין פה מבנה אחד שעומד, זה נראה כמו הרס בקנה מידה תנ"כי.
Israeli military correspondents mostly echo the talking points of the army, but their reporting has at times revealed a lot about Israel's intent in Gaza. This week, we heard officials essentially admitting to ethnic cleansing. Brigadier General Itzik Cohen told Israeli reporters in the entire northern Gaza Strip, the goal is complete cleansing. A correspondent with Israel's army radio also posted this map, which shows a plan to further carve up the north of the Strip. In a notable admission, Cohen was quoted as saying there is no intention to allow the residents of the northern Gaza Strip to return to their homes since there are no more civilians left. 2 days later, Israel's military tried to walk back those comments, saying they were made off the record and did not, quote, reflect the IDF's objectives and values. They could have also corrected the claim that there are no civilians left in northern Gaza, which is, of course, false. According to the UN, hundreds of thousands of civilians remain in the north, including a handful of journalists who've been raising the alarm for weeks. More than 1,000 Palestinians have already been killed in what appears to be the fulfillment of the so-called Generals' Plan, a blueprint proposed by former Israeli generals to forcibly depopulate the area. Under the plan, anyone who remains there would be considered a combatant who could be killed. Many fear that the ethnic cleansing of northern Gaza is laying the groundwork for a land grab and the construction of Jewish settlements. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denies that's on the agenda, but far-right members of his government are openly advocating for settling Gaza, and settler groups have gathered in anticipation on Gaza's border.
Thanks, Tariq. Our next piece is out of Kenya. However, there are some parallels with the U.S. election story. It's about the rise of the manosphere, populated by loudmouths, shock artists, and unapologetic chauvinists. The influencers who run the Kenyan manosphere say their work is about empowering men. Across podcasts, YouTube channels, and social media, they have shaped a narrative around modern masculinity, that men are oppressed, emasculated, vulnerable to either manipulative or excessively assertive women. In the West, some of the big names in the manosphere are Andrew Tate, Joe Rogan, and Sean Ryan. In Kenya, men like Erica Munga and Andrew Kibe have become key voices for entire communities of men to follow. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the appeal of the manosphere in Kenya and the dangers it poses to women there.
Men. Buying gifts to simply please her is a no. Buying gifts to reward her for doing something good is a yes. Flowers are for goats. Chocolates will make her fat. Buy her a long-lasting gift. A book. No simping.
Every Saturday morning, countless men across Kenya are glued to their phones. It's a weekly ritual for them. They log in for the tweets from Eric Amunga, known by his alias, Amerix.
Truthfully, 80% of modern men are in sad marriages. They are suffering. They are enslaved. In the modern femicentric world, the man is the ultimate loser.
Using the hashtag Masculinity Saturday, Eric Amunga, who uses a picture of American black civil rights leader Martin Luther King on X, posts to more than 2 million followers. The self-styled masculinity coach is consistently one of Kenya's top trending voices every weekend.
A nice guy is a slave. He is handcuffed by limitations. A woman will threaten a nice guy that if he doesn't do A, B, C, D, she will leave him, and the nice guy will be scared.
He holds spaces on X to just spread, I have to say, misogyny. That's who Eric Amunga is. He aims to provide guidance to men. That's what he says he does. He has been criticized a lot for promoting regressive views when it comes to gender roles and relationships. He emphasizes again on traditional masculine traits. So how a man dresses, what a man does, what a man eats, how a man treats a woman, how a man speaks to a woman.
It is packaged in a way that it sounds as if this is male empowerment. A lot of these men actually are looking to hear what they've always known about masculinity because they live in a patriarchal culture, in a patriarchal society, and it also answers to the fact that because they feel they've been disempowered and women look like they're advancing beyond them, they find this mob psychology to go along with the messages that Amerix expresses.
Part of what I've seen in his dialogues around Masculinity Saturdays really goes along rejection of what they call independent women who are then named as toxic feminists and toxic women, a reassertion of real men being real men, which is again an affirmation of very toxic ideas around not just physical violence, the kind of violence that also pursues very negative ideas about women's roles in society, whether that is their ability to work outside of the home, their ability to exert autonomy over their own bodies, their ability to make specific demands around equal relationships, both intimate and public, in vis-a-vis men.
Eric Amunga, Amerix, isn't the only voice in Kenya's so-called manosphere. There are numerous online influencers pushing out content for men, advising them on how to deal with professional pressures, health issues, their appearance, and especially with the women in their lives.
My wife hates when I watch you, yes, because your wife doesn't want you to stop being puny. That's why every time you watch this show and you go back to her with some energy, she's going to be like, I have to get that energy out of him.
Former radio host Andrew Kibe built a following of more than 420,000 YouTube subscribers before being banned in 2023 for violating hate speech policies. Despite the ban, Kibe continues posting on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. He also has his own website, www.mrlambistic.com, where followers can pay to listen to his live stream talks, join him on motorcycle rallies, and buy merchandise.
Women like adventure, they like strength. They lie and they cheat. And they need a man to take them out of that head.
The manosphere has really grown over the last couple of years because there are so many problems that young Kenyan men are facing, and they feel like there is barely any safe space to go and talk about these issues that they're having. The manosphere spaces particularly thrive on Twitter, which is now X, where there are these short-form messagings that many people can participate in real time.
In Kenya in particular, one could trace some of the earliest manifestations of the manosphere to 2006, to the evolution of what was called Development for Men organization, an organization that set itself up to champion men's rights under the guise of arguing that it was interested in looking at questions of violence against men. But on deeper interrogation of the work, you can see the combination of a dialogue around men's rights that is set in opposition to women's rights and men's problems in society as the fundamental basis of the manosphere.
The manosphere is not a Kenyan phenomenon. The flag bearer of online misogyny in the Anglosphere was Andrew Tate. In August 2022, he was shut down across social media as complaints about hate speech soared and charges of rape, human trafficking, and the sexual exploitation of women started racking up. Tate's huge following online gave rise to a new genre of content. Influencers around the world who've emulated his toxic style. In India, there is Dev Tyagi.
क्योंकि अगर मेरी बंदी घर से बाहर निकली और उसने लड़कों से दोस्ती करना शुरू करा तो वो मेरी बंदी नहीं है मैं सीधा कहूंगा घर से निकल.
In Greece, there is Michalis Balou.
Δεν υπάρχουν γυναίκες που απορρίπτουν, υπάρχουν απλά γυναίκες που δεν έχουν αυτό το οποίο.
In Kenya, Eric Amunga, Amerix, tops the list of contributors to the manosphere. We sent him an email request for his response to criticisms that he peddles in misogyny and hate speech against women. He didn't email his response back to us. He posted it on his favorite platform, X. There is a pattern to the factors behind the rise of the manosphere. From New York to Nairobi, there are communities of men who have glorified outdated, traditional, or rather patriarchal systems. Then there's socioeconomic pressures. In Kenya, nearly 80% of the 56 million strong population are aged 35 or younger. The unemployment rate is at 12%. And even though it is women who make up most of the unemployed, men say they feel the social squeeze much more intensely.
There's a lot of economic pressures, so there's an expectation in the community or in the society for men to be the primary breadwinners.
I'm trying to find a job, it's really hard. My wife thinks I'm a loser.
Men are feeling like, this changing gender roles is making it possible for women to increase their economic capacity, so then making them feel inadequate.
Parallel to these kinds of groups, there are men in the Kenyan society who are doing very positive and useful work, underscoring the fact that the discourses that are pursued in the manosphere do nothing for men themselves, rather than viewing the freedoms that women have received over the last 50 or so years as an opportunity to transform our society for the good of everyone. The discourses pursued in the manosphere actually contribute to the violence that we see that is targeted specifically as women.
Gender-based violence, femicide in Kenya, has made global news recently. In September this year, Olympian marathon runner Rebecca Cheptegei was set on fire by her partner during a dispute over land. 2 other Olympic runners have been murdered in years past, stabbed and strangled to death. These are just the headline cases. Investigative news outlet Africa Uncensored has done a deep dive into femicide in Kenya, uncovering statistics, patterns, and systemic failures that have led to violence against women rising in the country. There's no clear link between online influencers and these specific murders, but the manosphere has made justifying violence against women acceptable for a significant segment of Kenyan men.
What we particularly need to start thinking through is which men amongst us has a sober mind to look at the younger men and start talking to them in a different language, because the world has changed, and if we are not careful, you change or perish. So why can't we just pause for a moment and think through what we are actually doing in our quest to develop more harmonious cultures, but also a more formidable future for our children?
And finally, ever since 2016, Donald Trump has targeted journalists, branding them the fake news media, then the enemy of the people. For liberal news organizations in the United States, Trump's victory represents a threat to press freedom. He talks openly about vengeance against his detractors, a threat worth taking seriously. But Trump, the sequel, also represents an opportunity for those media outlets to rebuild trust with Americans. That is, if they're willing to learn from the recent past. For much of Trump's first presidency, liberal news organizations went all in on allegations from 2016 that the Trump campaign had colluded with Vladimir Putin's Russia in a plot to win him that election. That story, which was pushed by the Democratic Party and anti-Trump U.S. intelligence operatives, had more conspiracy to it than fact. The kind of thing that liberal news outlets alert us to when it's coming from the political right. There are already more than enough real issues here, starting with Trump's lying, his misogyny, outright racism, and criminal record, worthy of the U.S. media's attention. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.